Social media is filled with confrontation that is often petty, and it can ruin relationships with loved ones. Oftentimes, there is no gain to be found in engaging people on social media. Oftentimes, these conversations need to be taken elsewhere or perhaps not even had at all. In this episode, we're going to discuss a checklist of when to overlook content on social media and when to take the conversation offline. So welcome to Kingdom of the Logos, a Christian program of critical thinking and adventure, produced proudly by clergy in the Church of the Nazarene. And it really is exciting because Amanda recently got ordained. And of course, I'm Pastor J. Dylan Proctor, but as we throw over to Pastor Amanda to introduce herself.
Okay, so I guess I'm Reverend Amanda Sparrow now.
And that's an exciting thing. Amanda is quite humble, but that's a very good thing. Anthony got his first district license, so he's also coming on up the clergy ladder. I don't know if Anthony has anything he's going to say. I may have just
thrown everyone off.
Honestly, I'm very, very grateful to have my district minister's license. That's about it. That's all I can say.
And, of course, we do have a very special fourth chair with us today, and that is Pastor Mike Proctor.
Hi, I'm Pastor Mike Proctor.
Very good. And this is our first time being back in a few weeks, so we've got to kind of get ourselves worked out. There was Easter, and then there was district assembly, and all the things which come to invade church culture. But anyways, we're here to talk about some advice to give you on social media, so let's get right to that. So again, social media, it is filled with a lot of petty things, and you don't want that to ruin aspects of your life. You want to have good relationships with other people and real relationships. You know, you want your family and your friends to be on good terms with, and God wants us to be people of wisdom. Now here recently I've talked a lot out of Genesis and how evil it acts like a predatory animal and it wants to come and consume you. And it does this in really creative ways. It tempts you in a very, very, temptatious and luscious fashion. It always comes in a very appealing manner. Social media often baits us into doing, bad things. It is where evil draws its power. Sin and wickedness, it finds all sorts of places to fester, and social media can be one of those places. Now, I'm not saying that without any amount of self-awareness. I mean, we are on social media right now, so you've got to remember that being on social media in and of itself is not bad. It's not sin to be on social media. It is a tool. It is amoral by itself, but it can be used for good. It can be used for bad, and you've got to have some wisdom about how you get into it. So, without any further hesitation, here are 4 reasons why you should overlook posts on social media, or you should take the conversation elsewhere. And we're going to discuss these at length with our whole group, but let me just read through them very quickly for you. So number 1, is the topic something a person said? So think about that. Is the post about something someone said? And again, this is not like a preacher coming in and giving bad doctrine. You know, if one of us comes in here and says, and there is no Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and there's the demiurge, you need to come up to the preacher and say, hey, we've got a new pike out back. We need you to try out. There are times where
A little barbecue.
yeah, but if it's just something someone said, that's not really that substantive. Number 2, is the topic a person's appearance? Is it reducing things down to a superficial level? And somebody, people work out their things in life. A lot of times there are a lot of things which come to infect our brains and they work it out online, and you don't want to enable things, but at the same time, you don't want to get in the pettiness either. So number 2 is the topic a person's appearance. Number 3, is this just an emotional release? It's easy to be on social media, but it's kind of there forever. Somebody can put something nasty online in about 3 seconds, and then it's there for an indefinite amount of time until the internet breaks down and we all go back to the Stone Age. So if it's an emotional release, probably not worth your calculated response. And number 4, are they branding you with a motive? Is someone saying you did something you didn't do? Or are they trying to frame how the world thinks about you without any sort of justice? Again, don't give evil power. Don't let it fester. So let's talk about these 4 points, because I know social media is a place where a lot of families find turmoil with one another, and not just families, but also friends. Your fellow people. Wherever you go to church, and again, we're not here to take people away from the church. This is supplementing your Christian life. People may have their Christian friends at church they get in turmoil with over petty little things. So these rules are also applicable beyond social media, but we're really talking about that today. So let's go around here and talk about this first one. If the topic is just something someone said, again, people are talking about, oh, did you hear so-and-so say this, kind of the gossipy side of things. What do y'all think about that? Is that a time where you should really overlook it, take things elsewhere? Pastor Amanda?
Well, yeah, I think, anytime it turns into gossip, we have to be very careful. Obviously, as Christian people, we should not engage in gossip. I think though sometimes it's hard to distinguish when someone's just like, oh, hey, this is something that's happening in my life, or this is something I've heard, and then when it turns to gossip. But I think a good rule of thumb, especially on social media, is just not to engage in anything that even might be gossip. One, it may not be true. Two, even if it is true, it may not be really your place to engage in that conversation. And then also, why do you think that person posted in the first place? It probably is to trap others into joining in this conversation that somehow makes them feel better or makes other people feel worse. And so it just, especially if it's something like that, if it's a personal issue, if people are just saying, oh, did you hear this? Odds are, the phrase like, oh, did you hear this is kind of like, you know, hey, watch me do this. That phrase only precedes trouble. There generally is not a good thing that happens after those sentences. So yeah, we should stay away. If it's something that we think is actually detrimental or hurtful and there needs to be a conversation, then that conversation needs to happen offline. If it's something where we think, oh no, this could lead to actually a really harmful thing, this is hurting someone's reputation, or this is just a blatant lie, then that definitely needs to happen, at the very least, at a private message, at best, if you can see that person face to face to talk to them about
Yeah, and there are things which have to be discussed, but social media is not the place for that.
Right.
There's a lot of things that, you know, we have better tools for different tasks, and that's not a good tool for that. Anthony, do you have something on this?
I was just going to say that it's definitely not a medium that facilitates peaceful discourse.
No.
It's, you know, people can read it basically how they're feeling, and if they feel angry enough to make some sort of post about what somebody said, and then they get a reply, it's going to be seen as an act of aggression just because their mode of interpretation at that point in time is clouded by that emotion. And it's even more clouded by the fact that writing doesn't communicate everything that speaking in person does. And so, you know, whenever you read something in writing that's a response, it's way easier for that cloud of aggression or whatever feelings that they're having, resent, for that person, for that writing to filter through that. And so it's just not going to facilitate the discourse that you want.
Yeah, text is kind of atonal a lot of times, especially like social media text. People take it different ways. Pastor Mike, what are your thoughts on this? If it's just the topic of what someone said, you know, that's not as much substance as what someone might have done. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a very slippery slope into gossip, and that never leads to anything positive. So, grandmother told me if you can't say anything good, then don't say anything at all. But understand that it's just like Pastor Amanda said, that is a draw. It doesn't do anyone good to get involved in something. And you never know. That person may have not be following some of these rules that are reasons to overlook those posts. That person may have been just spouting out or releasing emotional energy. And so, you know, it may come across extremely emotional. They released it, they're over with it, and then when there's a response back, then it can even escalate even more.
Yeah. All right, well, going on to point 2, is the topic a person's appearance? Now, we live in the age of selfies, and people love to get online and do their selfies and stuff like that. And again, I'm not here to rule that selfies are sin or something of that nature, though that's one of those things where one always wishes they could be the one to list some stuff. But
the arbitrator of that one, yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, a lot of times people, they look to try to fill in gaps they have in their life online, which is really unhealthy to do. And a lot of times they'll kind of create a trap where they want to have other people talk about their appearance and maybe someone else's appearance, and it gets petty. What do y'all think about that? Pastor Amanda?
Well, I think, again, because it is social media and it's such a limited context, you don't know why they're doing what they're doing. Is it something where they're feeling insecure about themselves? Is it something they're trying to, maybe hurt somebody else's appearance? And again, maybe leading more into a bit of gossip. But because you can always tell those motives, it's a good rule of thumb to just walk away from that. And if someone is seeking attention, then there's better way to give people attention. And some people are attention starved. We rely so much on these kind of distance driven mediums to communicate with people that we've lost how to communicate face to face. And so if you see a friend or a family member who's doing some of these things where they're posting things like, oh, look at me, I'm so ugly, or can you believe I look like this, or whatever, or even if it's positive things, but it doesn't seem to actually have positive motive, it may seem really self-absorbed, the best place to say, hey, let's actually, talk about these self-image or these image issues is not more on social media. It's going to them in person and saying, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee and talk about this. I think you're having a hard day or a hard week. Let's be friends. Let's be family. But that cannot always happen on social media. And so there needs to be the appropriate response. This is, let's take this offline, let's have a serious conversation, and let's support each other in a way that's uplifting versus enabling.
Yeah, and with a lot of these times where people are really hung up with appearance online, they're wanting some sort of affirmation because there's a little bit of there's a gap that they're trying to fill in. Their worth of their self is not properly placed. And our modern culture, as it has moved from God, it has lost the notion that we are created in the image of God, and that is a sacred thing. Whatever you look like really does not matter one's relationship to God. That is not something which is pertinent to the manner of salvation or anything of an eternal matter. The fact that people would be hung up on such superficial characteristics shows that our world is not taking people to the place which is actually it's not fulfilling in life in the long term. And that's the thing. And really, you can't fill that void online. Like Amanda said, you've got to go out and invest with somebody personally. Pastor Mike, just going around our room right now in the studio, what do you think? When the topic is just personal appearance, superficial stuff.
Well, I remember Ben Carson said one time that, what makes up a person is not, physical attributes and looks or anything like that, but it really is him being a medical doctor and working with the brain, that it is the brain, it is the mind that makes up a person. And those things are extremely important to talk about beauty, I guess, or ugly, or however you want to discuss it. But I think there's an underlying motive there that it could be depression, it could be a number of things. But obviously, when someone engages in that, it is not the appropriate place to respond on social media. It should be face to face, preferably over a cup of coffee or a setting that is non-threatening.
Yeah. Anthony, do you have any thoughts on this?
Just that I'd probably be more likely to meet him over a cup of water. I don't drink coffee. So,
Well,
I think everybody did well.
We can give you hot coffee. Wait, did he say that we did well? Is he trying to rate us?
Oh, man.
Oh, well.
I have no contributions to make. That's all I'm trying to say.
I see what it is. This is getting a little bit of a haughty attitude. We've already been going through some of the a variety of sins. Now we get the haughtiness over there.
Another brick in the wall.
Another brick in the wall. And
hey, look, I just got my district minister's license. I'm coming out swinging. That's it.
No. What we're gonna do is we're gonna seal you up inside the new steeple and leave you there. All of this is in jest, but well, we hope. So the next one is the topic at hand an emotional release? And some people call this like the quick messaging or fast typing. I forget. I don't know. I'm out of touch with modern lingo. But there's some name for this where people kind of snap back really quickly, and it's stuff that's not thought out well. Or maybe they see something on the TV or the news, or maybe they see somebody else do something and they kind of spat out something really quickly without thinking. It's this idea that it really doesn't take long to put something out there permanently. And again, we're not talking about somebody who may actually be walking through something in life, though a lot of times there's different ways that people go about stuff. But we're talking about those quick releases which kind of come out of nowhere that really get up fiery debates which end up breaking people off from one another, which is just really, really unfortunate. What do y'all think about that? These quick, thrown out there, not thought out emotional releases that you should kind of just look past and say it's not representing who that whole person is. Yeah.
Well, and I think we can even see this in face-to-face conversations. People get heated in arguments or in conversations or debates, and so they just start saying things that they really, maybe they mean some of it, but they're not phrasing it properly, or they've not really thought it through enough to be able to communicate adequately their feelings or their ideas. And I think, like, if you were in person, if you would just turn around and walk away from a bad conversation, then I think that's like what you should do in Facebook as well, is when you're reading this or hearing it, if they're posting a video of it or whatever, and you're like, you know what, this is not worth engaging in because it is harmful. You're not going to win that topic, or you're not going to win that conversation. Even if winning's not your goal, you're not going to produce anything good out of it. That all that's going to happen is they're going to drag you down to that level as well. And if they are just doing it as simply as a release, I know some people keep like digital blogs or digital journals, and they treat Facebook kind of like almost as a journal or a diary. And it's like, you know what, this really isn't for me, this is for them, and so it's best to ignore it. And in like the second topic, is it something that's petty? Is it just something for them to get attention for? Then obviously by giving them attention, you're enabling them versus helping them through whatever issue may be coming up.
Yeah, it's where evil draws its power. Yeah, it draws its power from dragging people down and down and down. Pastor Mark.
Well, I think Amanda said a key word there was, it doesn't produce anything positive. But if, as Christians, the mission of the church, the people of God, is to bear fruit of the Spirit. And I think one of the characteristics of the fruit of the Spirit is to have self-control. And so this person who may have emotionally released something, regardless of what it was, may have cooled off. And so, first of all, they probably were not exhibiting or producing fruit that is self-control there. But in the long run, there are others who are watching, and it impacts them and influences them. So, try to exhibit some self-control.
Yeah, and first of all, people are actually quite different online than they are in person. Sometimes you get people who are just like a troll in real life, and that's a bizarre thing. And especially, and I know the pastor shouldn't be saying this because you love people and you want them to come to know Christ, but you realize you've got to kind of give stuff a name and be like, that attitude is a problem. You've got to move past that and move towards Christ-likeness. Again, one of the whole things we've talked about here is that evil is predatory and it wants to suck you down, it wants to draw power. But God does not want that for us. He wants people to move away from that and move towards the holiness which we are called to. Pastor Mike?
I think also, for it to be an emotional release of someone, it's probably a crisis moment. And people tend to say things and that they really probably don't mean 100% there too. So best thing to do is abstain from commenting on something like that.
Yeah, because social media actually can be a good tool for celebrating life with one another and enjoying the moments of life, celebrating our love with our loved ones and things of that nature, and even friends. But at the same time, there are times where these quick emotional releases, they want to drag people down. They kind of come out of nowhere. They may not even mean it when they said it. Some people may not even feel that way when they say it. They just feel, just a quick throw that out there and then go along with life. All right. Anthony, any thoughts on this? Or are you going to rate our questioning so far?
Based on the last interaction with that, no comment.
No comment. Well, sometimes, now I'm almost feel tempted to grill on that too. There should be a comment.
There should be a ditto or I'm with you or something.
Yeah. I mean, I probably would just have said exactly what Mike said, to be honest.
Very good.
Alrighty. Well, the last one is, are they branding you with a motive? And this is sort of where they're kind of saying this is how you feel about me. They're kind of telling the world how to think about you. Saying like, oh, well, you feel this way. They may set up something where either you agree with me or you must hate me. They're kind of saying, well, you didn't like all the pictures I put up of myself, therefore you think I'm ugly, or maybe you said something to me that I didn't like, and I'm going to kind of twist it. So it's basically this idea of people twisting and kind of giving you a motive that's not really there. And again, just tying this back to some wisdom literature and looking at Proverbs 8, when wisdom itself is being personified, you hear in Proverbs 8, 35 and 36, wisdom actually saying the following: For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord, but those who miss me injure themselves, and all who hate me love death. There are people who do not like wisdom and understanding, and they have to brand sort of motives on different things in the world and other people, and even yourself, and, well, perhaps even those of us here doing something like a Christian podcast. They want to give you a motive which is not found therein, and then they can kind of twist. And evil loves this stuff. Like, evil really loves this stuff. This is where it draws its power. It's like, yes, I love death. Let's suck people down. Let's create misery and stuff. What do y'all think about this? When people twist words and try to brand you as doing something you didn't do, and put you in a weird box where you're kind of forced to affirm something from them, even though that's not where you should be.
Well, I think trying to correct people who are doing that kind of stuff to you it's like arguing with a 3-year-old. There's just no winning. Because you're just going to end up going, yeah, nah. Like, that's it. That's all you're going to end up doing on Facebook. Like, you said, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. And that, I mean, that's all you've become now, is you're arguing basically with someone. It's not a good platform. And like I said, if there's something you really feel is going to ruin your reputation or the reputation of others, you want to be careful, and especially if you think it's something that is very harmful, that's leading towards something immoral or illegal, you want to correct it. But you have to do it in such a way that you don't get dragged down yourself. And that can either go by, I think sometimes the best thing we can do is remove ourselves from toxic situations. And then it also is to bring it to our terms. They've already set the parameters of that battle, and you will lose that if they're in control of that. But if you redesign those parameters, then you can find yourself actually maybe on a little bit of the higher ground to be able to communicate more effectively. And I think also there is, for most people, there is a sense that Facebook is almost kind of a twilight zone. We come to it knowing that it's not quite real. And so if somebody's saying something bad about you or saying this is what you think, and it's somebody else, it's not obviously you communicating those thoughts or ideas or opinions, then I don't think you have to put too much emphasis that other people are taking that seriously. Because, again, it's social media. And so the best thing to do sometimes is to walk away. Or if it's starting to get real bad, you need to tag that person, grab that person, kind of come to the side and say, hey, this is what you're doing. This is harmful. I'm going to give you the benefit of doubt that you didn't mean to. Maybe you were expressing just some emotional frustration. But if you are meaning to be harmful, we need to talk this out, or we need to find an advocate or a mediator that can help us better communicate these issues. And take it off social media, because you will never win that battle or that conversation or achieve anything if you keep it on that platform. And
the temptation to do it on that platform is so great. Like, this is the thing. I know we've talked a lot about, Adam and Eve, but when the serpent comes, he makes a pretty good argument. And Eve's brain does the rest of the work. He kind of comes and says, did God really say that? And eventually Eve looks at the apple and she's like, or the fruit, and it's often depicted as an apple, but she looks at the fruit, whatever fruit that may be, and says, that's good for food. And Eve may have been perfectly right with that, but that wasn't the whole puzzle. That wasn't the whole thing. It was just a piece of the puzzle. Fruit generally is good for food, generally. But at the same time, this was not just any fruit. It also contained the knowledge of good and evil, and there was a commandment of law pertaining it. So oftentimes we look at this and we're like, well, there is an argument. They really did say this. I need to respond back. And there's that temptation. It comes justified in your mind. You really want to do it. But this is just giving power to evil. Sometimes when stuff gets on there, again, there are more than one ways to sort this stuff out with people than online. It's not like you're being ignorant of the situation. I mean, you can carry things elsewhere and have a more reasoned response to stuff. Pastor Mike.
Well, I would just like to comment on what Pastor Amanda said and emphasize the part that it is immaturity. She mentioned, like 3-year-olds, but also, more than likely this was a friend or someone that you at least cared about, or they cared about you. And so airing this out in public in front of everyone is something that, you just shouldn't happen. But I remember one of the sayings when I was growing up is, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That is a lie straight from the devil, because they do. But when you do it in front of people, it causes so much more hurt and harm. So the best thing to do is to contact that person face to face and say, hey man, I care about you, or whatever, and get to the bottom of it. And they can always disagree, but don't fall to the fight and say, hey, here's a chip on my shoulder, and all of a sudden knock it off and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, words can have an impact on people, but you got to put them in their place too. You can't give too much power to words. And a lot of people want to give absolute power to stuff, say like, oh, you said something I didn't like, so now I'm going to get really worked up on it. But evil draws its power from that too. When you give too much power to something what someone said. Again, something someone does and something someone says are very, very different. Anthony, any thoughts on that before we have one final point?
Yes. I would say that whenever you're asking yourself, are they branding you with a motive? I think this is actually a really, really great question, not only because people often do this in sort of, I guess you could say, a troll-like fashion, in a way that, they're doing this with absolutely no intention of ever reconciling with you or getting to a point of cooperation. It's entirely just to fuel confrontation. But I think beyond that also, this is a really, really important question, because this is a huge motivator, whether or not they're branding you with a motive, because that becomes public. Whether or not this is on social media, in writing, or whether or not this is in person, just in words, whenever people brand you with a motive, that's a huge motivator for you, because you want to defend your reputation and all these sorts of things, especially if you're trying to live in an upright way. And so what I would say about that, and what's important to think about concerning this, is how Christ responds to accusations.
Yeah.
Whenever Christ is being accused of something, he's totally silent almost every single time. No response to the accusations. And I think there's a certain brilliance in that. Not only is it the righteous thing to do, but I think the effects of it are absolutely genius. You're not making their argument true to your audience, and you're not making it true in real life. You're not becoming a monster to defend yourself, and you're not convincing the audience that you're worried about your reputation for of the motive that they're trying to attribute to you.
Yeah.
And so I think the best thing to do whenever incorrect motives start being attributed to you is just to be silent and walk away. And that's something for me that's really, really hard, because once my reputation gets at stake, that's what I get concerned about. And so that's what I'm thinking, and I'm like, okay, I got to try to defend that. And at the end of the day, you've got to do it the way Christ does it, which is just to take it in silence and walk away.
Well, it's like when there's a fire. If you can take the oxygen away from the fire will go out. And that's really the tactic that you're talking about here. Deprive the oxygen of it. Don't give it any more power. But to just take that a little bit further. Whenever we see Jesus, if you remember at the interview he has basically with Pilate and the high priest, they kind of brand him all this stuff. But after Jesus is on the cross, and after they've got a sign they want to put above him, they at first they're like, put Jesus or Christ Jesus, King of the Jews. And then some of them come up, and it's almost like they're like a modern news outlet. They're like, but say he said he was the King of the Jews. They got to add that little tag in there, even though it's not true. But whenever you see these sort of tactics going on, you can tell that there's usually some sort of sin, nefarious act going on below the surface. Whenever people want to throw in those little motive things, where they're saying, well, he said that, or this is how they felt about it, and they start branding other people. That's just really a bad place to be. Well, final point I want us to talk about as we wrap this up is a skill in what you should do instead. I know we've already said you got to sometimes take these things in person, but beyond that, there are times where when things get out of hand, you actually need to give them up to God, and maybe even hand situations over to other Christian people that you know. People that you know and trust. When there's a problem, say somebody actually has a real life issue, you see someone acting out in a way that is indicative of a real problem in their life. There are times where these really do need to be handed over to God, and there are times where you need to hand them over to good people that you trust and say, look, there's a problem here. I'm not in a position to deal with this, but someone needs to address this particular issue. Someone is getting in a bad place. And usually when the church gathers around one another, when we actually find real turmoil in life, people ask, where is God physically? We are the body of Christ. And I'm not saying that we are all God. That's not at all what I'm saying. But we are the holy church, which is the bride of Christ. And we are instrumental in doing the ministry of the gospel here on the world. There are times when we need to hand situations to other Christians to help dealing with problems. And that's a very different methodology of dealing with problems that oftentimes start off as petty. And again, if it's just petty, then just ignore it. Don't let it suck the oxygen from everyone else and turn into a big fire. Just cut it off. But if it is a big problem, then you do need to either deal with it outside of that or hand that to other people. What do y'all think about that? Just handing it off to other good Christian people that you actually trust. Pastor Mike?
Well, I think that's absolutely appropriate, and I think you should always, use social media to build people up and not tear people down. It is a means of sharing life together, so social media is not bad in and of itself, but it can be used as a tool to bring chaos in the situation, but it also can be used to bring order. So bringing a good group of Christian folks around you. And another thing that I don't think we mentioned is a lot of times you don't know exactly what state of mind people might be. I know it was said it was an emotional release, but there's all kinds of things that can affect good judgment. So always choose wisely the words that you use.
Pastor Amanda, any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, and I think it's interesting as we're talking about this topic. Obviously, social media is a relatively new medium. However, I mean, Paul writes about this in his letters about how to deal with disagreements within the church, and he talks about how if you have an issue with somebody, you go to them first.
Yeah.
And then if that doesn't get resolved, maybe you bring, a good brother or sister in Christ. And then if that doesn't work, then you grab a couple more people.
Yeah.
And it's really this idea that there has always been brokenness amongst human beings. I mean, since the fall. One of the first reactions we see is Adam blaming Eve and Eve blaming the serpent. And there's this idea that now this brokenness is not just with God, but it is with one another. And so it really, what will mark us as people of God is how we deal with these disagreements. And there are Christian ways of disagreeing, and there's ways of coming to different conclusions. But when we come to whatever platform, whether it is in person, in writing, or on social media, how we're going to interact with one another. And it's difficult, as we've mentioned before, with it being written. You don't hear tone, you don't sometimes hear sarcasm or maybe different emotional cadence in somebody's voice. But again, if you think it's going to be misread or misunderstood, then just don't. It's not necessary. Social media is not necessary for communication. And if there's something vital that has to be said to somebody who is too far away for you to communicate in person or through the telephone, then you have to find a different way to do that. And there's just no need for it to be on a public platform like Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And we can very easily see that sometimes these become the pits of the human experience versus something actually uplifting. And so if we are to be Christian people who use tools that are the tools around us, then we have to know when we need to speak up, when we don't, and also to know we're not alone, like Pastor Dylan mentioned. And this is not just to grab somebody when we need someone on our side of the argument, but to know that we are the body of Christ. And as such, we will never find ourselves by ourselves, that there are other people who have our back, not in a debate of for or against, but in just conversation and in the brokenness of life.
And to just take this a little bit further, I think social media is a tool that it will exaggerate whatever characteristics are found within a person and within just humanity in general. It exaggerates the sins and things of that nature. But if we go to the epistles of John, which I love the Johannine literature, but the third epistle of John, and it's if you look there in 1:11, you find it says, "Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but imitate what is good. Amen. Whoever does good is from God, and whoever does evil has not seen God." Now, of course, if you take that out of the context of all of Scripture, you would say, well, I'm doing my good, therefore it's good. No. Goodness comes from God and God alone. And if you're doing the goodness which is derived from God, well, you're doing the goodness which is derived from God. So you're connected in that way. But if you are imitating evil, then you're just going to imitate evil. And on social media, we see a lot of times people's personal disposition being exaggerated. Kind of the entry into social media is really low, so you can kind of do whatever. But if you're someone who spends time imitating that which is good, you become more and more Christ-like. The sanctification, if you're pursuing that, if you're living the sanctified life, if you're actually moving towards the goodness of God, then those traits are going to be coming out. And so that's a good place, I think, to wrap up that conversation. Any other final thoughts, questions, or comments from anyone here in the room? Anthony?
I think a really, really great takeaway from this subject is not just the questions themselves, although the questions are a really good way to tell whether or not you should overlook posts on social media from your loved ones. But I think also taking the time to ask a certain set of questions instead of just responding on an impulse or on the first track of thought that you have, or whatever your first initial reaction is, defend this idea or defend this person or defend myself, whatever else. Instead of acting on that, acting it more in actual response to what they are doing. And whenever you do that, it's not necessarily that they're trying to speak the truth and let everybody else know what it is. A lot of times it's much more personal than that. And whenever you realize that it is a personal thing, that they're doing something mostly as something for themselves, then it makes it a lot easier to say, okay, this is the appropriate response then.
Yeah. You know, we could have called this Trouble in Twilight Zone. When Amanda first said that it was the Twilight Zone, I thought she meant because every time, like if you watch Twilight Zone, every episode's kind of different.
Yeah.
Like they're not even connected. Every time you get on Facebook, the app looks different. And I thought that's actually where she was going with it
Yeah.
at first. But anyways, with that being said, we hope that you enjoyed our program. Make sure that you are supporting your local church. Again, Kingdom of the Logos, it is a supplemental tool. It's a podcast to carry with you throughout the life. I mean, you can download it on your phone. You can listen to it, carry it with you wherever you go. But most importantly, be having the gospel in your heart. That's what needs to be carried in your heart. And make sure you are in a good local church and you are supporting them. With that being said, God love you and have a blessed day.